I have been providing financial support to my mother for many years. Despite having already sent over $2,000, she still claims it's not enough. While contemplating escaping this situation, I bought a new house. However, she demanded, if you want to live in this house, increase your monthly remittance to $5,000. Will I continue to be exploited by my mother? No, I cannot allow this. I finally found the courage to stand up to her actions. My name is Linda. I am 45 and unmarried. I once dreamed of marriage, but fate did not bring anyone special my way. It's been a long time since I gave up on that dream, and while I wish I could say I enjoy living alone, that is not quite the case. The reason lies with my somewhat problematic mother. The difference in how she treats my sister and me is striking. I have no memories of my mother doing anything for me as a child. In contrast, she showered my sister with affection, praise, and plenty of pocket money. I was always exploited by my mother, never receiving any allowance or monetary gifts, as they were always taken away. I'm saving it for you, she claimed, but it became clear there were no bank accounts under my name, and she had used everything for herself. I never received a birthday present, and all the clothes I wear are hand-me-downs from my sister. The cute outfits that suited my beautiful sister never looked good on me, making me feel embarrassed. My father was indifferent to family affairs, believing his role was to work and provide his salary. Although we were not wealthy, we were not poor either. However, I always felt lonely. The amount of food I received compared to my sister was clearly less, and I don't remember ever eating sweets. As a result, I was quite thin, and the difference between my beautiful sister and me was even more pronounced. My mother's affection tilted more and more towards my sister, leaving my heart constantly filled with tears. If it weren't for kind friends, I might have turned out twisted. Compared to my beautiful and loved sister, I, being plain, was not cherished by my mother. Despite being a housewife, she despised household chores, and the house was always a mess. Before I knew it, I was cleaning up, and eventually, I ended up doing all the housework. At that time, I was still in elementary school. I took on all the household chores, and this became useful when I became an adult, but I held no gratitude towards my mother. No matter how hard I worked doing laundry or cooking, I never received a word of praise or thanks from her. When I was in elementary school, I was often made to do heavy shopping. Meanwhile, it was normal for my mother to relax in the living room, watching TV and eating snacks. How can I possibly feel grateful to such a mother? She rarely showed up at school events, and at sports festivals, she would watch only my sister's performance and leave early. During home visits, she would say in front of the teachers, "This child is so poor at her studies, it's embarrassing." When I reached middle school, I stopped expecting anything from my mother. Every day, I mechanically handled the household chores and barely had any conversations with her. It was normal to see her and my sister chatting happily. In high school, when I wanted something, I started a part-time job, but my mother took more than half of my earnings as rent. Any resistance or complaint was met with a scolding, "Are you disobeying your parents? You should be grateful to your parents, who's allowing you to live here and go to high school," she would say, accusing me of lacking gratitude. "At least give money to your parents as a sign of gratitude," was her constant refrain. Despite my father earning the living expenses, my mother, who did not manage any household duties properly, talked as if it was her achievement. My sister, seeing me being used and scolded by our mother, just laughed. From a young age, she probably felt superior because she was the only one treated specially by our parents. My father was always detached from the family, and upon returning from work, he would retreat to his room, barely engaging in any conversation. During my childhood, I accepted this family environment as normal. However, as a high school student, I realized the abnormality of our family situation and decided to leave home as soon as possible with the money I earned from my job. When I secured a job and left home, I was enveloped in relief from no longer being exploited. I will never be exploited again, I told myself. Since then, I have rarely returned home. I did not contact my parents, nor did they contact me. I thought it was better to remain estranged. However, at the age of 30, my father suddenly passed away. Although I was shocked by his death in his 60s, I had no time to grieve, as his death meant my mother was now living alone. My fears about her living alone were confirmed when she said, "Come live with me and take care of me." Memories of my childhood resurfaced, and I feared being exploited again. Moreover, I could see a future where I would be overwhelmed by balancing work and taking care of the household alone. I continued to avoid my mother as much as possible, relieved when I heard that my sister had started living with her. It's just my sister and her 2 children. She does not have a husband now, having divorced due to personality differences. There were already signs of discord between her and her husband while my father was alive, and they divorced around the same time he died. As a result, my sister returned home. I didn't particularly mind this situation, and I felt relieved that the talk of living with my mother had ceased. My mother, too, probably thought living with my sister and her grandchildren would make her happier than living with me. Everything seemed to have returned to normal, but the situation was not that simple. Soon after my sister and her children returned, I received a call from my mother demanding, "Do something. You owe me for raising you." My sister had started living with our mother not because she was lonely, but because of her divorce. Despite this, in my mother's view, my sister had decided to live with her because she is thoughtful of her mother. Following this, my mother continued to make unreasonable demands, saying I should do something too. As I do not have a high income, I wanted to avoid being exploited again, so I kept dodging calls and messages. Finally, my mother even contacted my workplace, demanding transfer half of my daughter's salary to me. I reluctantly decided to start sending $500 a month, fearing that my mother might show up at my company. I thought this would bring peace, but it seems I was too optimistic. I had not yet fully understood my mother. There was no way she would be satisfied that easily. It was only a matter of time before she demanded an increase in remittance. The remittance increased by $100, then another $100. However, she claimed, "Your sister and her children are here, so we need more money," and demanded an even greater increase. When I asked if my sister was not working, my mother indignantly responded, "Do you intend to make your busy sister work? How heartless of a sister are you? Why is my sister forgiven and only I am blamed? My mother hasn't changed at all." I had given up thinking there was any hope, yet it seems I still hope to be loved or appreciated by her. My feelings are a mix of frustration and anger at the unfairness. However, remitting money might also be the best way to avoid my mother's pressure. At least if I send money, she won't nag me. Although I did so reluctantly, it did not affect my livelihood, so I increased the remittance to $1,000. Will this bring peace? No, I still underestimated my mother. She was cunning. She continued to come up with various reasons, saying, "We need money for your niece's school entry fees. The cost of food increases as the children grow. Utility bills are no joke," and demanded more. The remittance I started at $30 gradually increased by $100, $200, and after 15 years, it ballooned to $2,000 a month. Indeed, I live alone and have fewer expenses, and my income has increased over the years of working, but honestly, this amount of remittance is a burden. The business climate isn't good, and there is no hope for further salary increases. Yet, in addition to regular remittances, there are times when she demands extra pocket money, saying, "I'm short on money this month. My living expenses vanish with your sister and her children, and I want to enjoy myself too," says my mother. It seems the solution would be for my sister to work, but that idea does not reach my mother. My sister's children are old enough to not need constant care. Even suggesting work is met with criticism. Your sister is already having a tough time. Don't you think it's cruel to make her work? It's shocking how overprotective she is. If asked why I don't talk directly with my sister, of course, I have tried. I suggested to her, "Hey, why don't you start working?" But she snapped back, "How can you say such heartless things?" My sister knows she can rely on my mother to handle everything, and she understands that I cannot defy my mother. As long as I am a convenient presence for my mother, she thinks it's fine to use me too. It may seem foolish, but it was inevitable that my sister, who was pampered by my mother, turned out this way. She is also one of my mother's victims. Nonetheless, I can't bring myself to feel sympathy. Considering her age, she should understand the situation and change her behavior, but instead, she is content with the status quo, which is the real problem. If this continues, my sister might become a parent who exploits her own children just like our mother. That is my biggest concern. Her children, now high school and middle school students, must have their thoughts on observing their grandmother, who lives with their mother. I hope they grow up healthy, but I fear they might end up being exploited by my sister in the future. I absolutely want to avoid that. If that happens, my future would be bleak. I've become calm enough to think about this. Am I satisfied with a life where I continue to be exploited by my mother and sister? I've decided I no longer want to dedicate my life to them. I've been sending remittances to avoid trouble, but recently I've become calm enough to think about my situation. Maybe it's time to escape. After sending remittances for 15 years, I feel I have sufficiently repaid my mother for raising me. As for my sister, the debt I owe her is virtually non-existent. We have never supported each other, and I have never felt love from my sister. In fact, she looks down on me just like my mother does. Accepting this fact, I took my passbook in hand. Despite dedicating most of my income to remittances to my mother for a long time, I managed to save a little. Looking at the balance in my passbook, I made a significant decision. It was the start of a new life. I will start a new life from today, I decided, and immediately began checking real estate websites. I then resolved to visit my mother to tell her I'm moving out of state. When I returned home after a long time and brought up the topic, my mother looked at me sternly and with surprise. Her stern gaze always made my heart shrink. Though I wanted to start a new challenge, I felt small in front of that gaze. Meanwhile, my sister showed no interest in my story, laughing at the TV. The house was as messy as ever, and the moment I walked in, I remembered being ordered by my mother to clean up. She still seems to think of me only as someone to do the housework. But I ignored her commands and continued talking about my moving plans. Though I was worried about her reaction, I proceeded without raising my face. "What will you do about your job?" my mother asked. "I've requested a transfer to a branch of my current company at the new location. If the transfer doesn't work out, I plan to look for a new job there," I answered. "Oh, and where is this new house of yours?" my mother asked. "Oh, it's a bit old, but I worked hard to buy it," I replied. I had no intention of revealing the specific location. This move is to put distance between me and my mother. "So, where is it?" my mother pressed again. I pulled out a flyer from a real estate agent and showed it to her. After visiting several real estate agents, I finally found a property with ideal conditions that I could barely afford with my savings. The flyer featured a photo of a somewhat old but spacious house. "What this? Why did you choose such a big house?" my mother exclaimed in surprise. "Well, I thought about various things," I replied vaguely. "Are you stupid? It's unreasonable for you to live alone. You always lack proper thinking." "Oh, how shameless," my mother criticized. I had expected it, but her reaction was harsh. "If you have that much money, you should increase the remittance," she said. Those words made me tremble. It was the most important thing I needed to discuss today. More significant than the move, and it required much more courage. I took a deep breath and said to my mother, "Actually, I have something to talk about. I can no longer afford to send remittances." What my mother responded. I had been waiting for this moment. I was truly scared. Although my mother was getting older and weaker, it wasn't easy to erase the ingrained belief that parents are absolute that had been instilled in me since childhood. But if things were to continue as they were, I might have to continue sending money to my sister even after my mother passed away. Thinking this, I mustered all the courage I had and announced my decision. I've bought a house and used up my savings. There's a mortgage to pay. I really can't afford to send you money anymore. What? You must be joking, you ungrateful child, my mother exclaimed. If it's financially tough, either of you should work, I retorted. It was clear that if I stayed at home, I would just continue to be yelled at. Unable to endure it any longer, I decided to confront my family, but I could see a future where I would be criticized by both my mother and sister and be defeated by them. Therefore, I made the only choice I could to escape. I quickly stood up and walked to the entrance. Wait a minute. Do you think that's acceptable? My mother said. I've had enough, goodbye, I said, and left the house. You ungrateful child, my mother's voice echoed behind me, but I did not look back. Until the end, my mother did not show gratitude and insisted that I should continue sending remittances. I was just a cash cow to her. I believe this is the right thing. Even if I am criticized for being ungrateful, my actions are not wrong. Reassuring myself, I kept running. My previous apartment was close to my parents' home, but my new house is much farther away. The new house is far enough that my mother cannot easily visit, which gives me a sense of security. Finally, I have my freedom, I muttered, feeling lighter. However, 1 month later, an unexpected call came from my mother. Seeing Mom on the caller ID, I had a bad feeling. Ignoring the call seemed like it would lead to trouble, so I reluctantly answered. I've never known my mother to call without ominous news. When I picked up the phone, I heard an unusually cheerful voice. Hey Linda, how are you? Mom, what's going on? I asked, and she replied, this place is great. Where are you? Are you on a trip? I asked, as it wasn't unusual for my mother and sister to go on trips with the money I sent. Thinking about the intended purpose of the remittances brought sadness. But this time, it didn't seem to be about them boasting of a trip. Actually, where do you think we are? My mother said, making it sound like a riddle. Although I had strong words I wanted to say, I replied hesitantly, I don't know where you are. My mother chuckled smugly and revealed, actually, we're at your new house. Shocked, I exclaimed, what? Yes, we figured out the location from the flyer you showed us. Actually, we've already moved in, my mother revealed. Stunned, I shouted, you moved in. We just came to check it out with your sister. But the house is ready to live in. All the furniture is set up, and the fridge is full of food. It's like you've already moved in completely. You should have told us you were living here already. All the furniture and appliances are brand new, so we didn't need to bring anything from the old house. So we'll be living here from today. What? While I panicked, my mother and sister were happily chatting on the other end of the phone. Wow, isn't this the latest massage chair? It's easy to place in a big house. Linda, were you planning to eat a fancy steak by yourself? We'll eat that. This big TV and sound system are wonderful. Look at this fine leather sofa. Oops, I spilled some food. Hearing this, I felt faint. Hey Mom, how did you get into the house? How? The door was unlocked, so we just walked in. You walked in. More importantly, Linda, where are you now? It's very careless of you to leave the door unlocked. We'll keep an eye on the house for you. Actually, if you want to come back in, there's a condition. What? While I was panicking, my mother was probably smirking on the other end of the phone. If you want to live in this house, increase the remittance to $5,000 a month. What? Didn't I tell you I'm not sending remittances anymore? You really thought that I would allow you to do that? I'm going to lock all the doors of the house so you can't get in. If you want to live in this house, you need to increase the allowance to $5,000 a month. Oh, and since we'll be living together in this luxurious house, let's not call it remittance anymore. It's an allowance. You will give me $5,000 every month. There's no way I can just give you that much money. If you can't pay, that's fine. I'll take the house. You can have the old house I used to live in. Wait, Mom. What about the kids if you're going to live in my house? It seems my mother and sister are together right now. What happened to them, I asked, and she replied, they've moved out. What do you mean, I asked my sister, and she responded grumpily. Hanf. Both of them started saying, we don't want to live together, they went to their father's. I just told them to work part-time to bring some money home. I felt dizzy. In the end, my sister was trying to exploit her children just like my mother. It's no wonder my nephews wanted to leave. However, I felt relieved to hear that story. They should be able to lead a decent life with their father. I've always thought they shouldn't be under my mother and sister, so at least that worry is gone. Taking a moment to calm my heart, I took a deep breath and declared, Mom, let's end this. I won't send remittances anymore. Absolutely no more remittances. If you say that, you won't be able to enter this house. That's fine. I don't intend to live with you or my sister anymore, and I don't want to have anything to do with either of you. I finally said it. The words of disownment to my mother. I should have made this decision sooner. Not just putting some distance, but I should have clearly declared disownment. It took a long time to muster this courage, but now there is no hesitation. I've decided to disown both of you, I emphasized again. My mother seemed flustered on the other end of the phone. She must have sensed my changed attitude. Fine, do as you like. But I'm living here. That was my mother's retaliation, but it no longer affects me. Calmly, I said to my mother, Mom, calm down and listen. What is it? I am calm. That new house, I've actually demolished it already. So we're taking this house because it's what? What? As my mother was confused, I reiterated the fact. The place where I bought the new house has already been cleared. That dilapidated house is gone. What? But this house is magnificent, and all the furniture and appliances are here. So Mom, where exactly are you? Did you check the nameplate? Nameplate. As she responded, my sister's surprised voice was heard in the background. Wait, Mom, the nameplate here has someone else's name on it. What do you mean? Linda, did you get married and change your name? So, calm down. That house isn't mine. While my mother was panicking, I responded calmly. During the call, my mother was at a loss for words. At that moment, I picked up a brochure from the real estate agent that I had by my side. I had asked about the surrounding information when I went to see the property. Remembering this, I recalled the real estate flyer I had given my mother. Mom, you said you went to that place with the flyer I gave you, right? Yes, the location was exactly like the house in the photo on the flyer. That house in the flyer actually had several similar properties. Did you know that? What? There are several luxury houses in that area, and the house on the flyer was one of them. The house you are in was in excellent condition and priced high. It was out of my reach, and a new owner was found immediately, according to the real estate agent. What? The place I bought is a bit away from that area. It's an old property actually intended for demolition and very cheap. Like I said before, I've already cleared the site and plan to build a small house there. I intend to use the extra space as a rental garage. What? What's going on? I'll continue working while starting a side business with the rental garage. But the door was unlocked. Someone must have forgotten to lock it, or they were planning to come back soon. Either way, being so careless could lead to people like you trespassing. Trespassing? Yes, that's because it's someone else's house. Is that true? Who knows? But the truth will become clear soon. What? At that moment, a commotion suddenly started in the background on my mother's end. There was the sound of running and shouts of thief. No, we're not thieves, my sister exclaimed as someone else was shouting. It seems the actual residents of the house had arrived. Linda, this is your fault. Do something. What should I do? As always, I live in an apartment near my parents' home. Although I had cleared the intended site for my new home, no building had yet been constructed, making it impossible to move in. My mother and sister were quite far away, more than 3 hours by train or bus from here. What do you expect me to do? It seemed my mother realized that her demands were unreasonable, as she fell silent. Even if she had been nearby, I had no intention of resolving her issues. But as I thought this, I suddenly heard a noise. It seemed my mother had dropped her phone. All I could hear were the screams of my mother and sister shouting, "No, no. It's not like that," followed by a voice saying, "This is the police, don't move." It felt like something out of a drama. I quietly hung up the phone, wishing I could have witnessed the scene. Later, a local newspaper reported in a small section about a parent and child who had trespassed into someone else's apartment. I was not involved. The police had called me to possibly act as a guarantor or to take responsibility for them, but I declined, stating I had already disowned them. Ultimately, my sister's ex-husband dealt with the situation, and afterward he too cut ties with her. Trespassing is a criminal act, and as a result, my sister lost the ability to see her children. If my nephews wanted to see their mother, they could, but it seemed they had no desire to meet her. I wondered how my sister had treated them while they lived together. Perhaps she had imposed the same household duties on them that my mother once forced upon me. Thinking about this was distressing. When I apologized over the phone, her ex-husband also expressed his frustration, saying my ex-wife's actions have been a headache. We both repeatedly shared our feelings over the phone. My nephews, now away from my sister, are reportedly living happily and brightly, which relieved me. However, the problems with my mother and sister are another story. After various upheavals, the matter was finally settled through a compromise. If theft had been the goal, the settlement would have been high. But as the intent was residential intrusion, the settlement was about $2,000. It seemed not to be a significant loss for my mother, but in reality, it was different. That $2,000 was apparently her last savings. Including my father's inheritance, none of the $2,000 I sent monthly was left. Naturally, money runs out when spent on luxury dining, travel, beauty treatments, and buying branded goods. Just thinking about the situation being so bad that she demanded more than double the remittance was frightening. Making the decision to move and cut ties with my family was undoubtedly the right choice. If I hadn't made that decision, I would still be exploited by my mother. After being released and the settlement was completed, my mother returned to her old house. She continued to demand remittances, so I blocked her calls and moved to a temporary apartment until my new house was completed. If I hadn't taken this measure, they would have barged into my house. The temporary apartment is very close to my new home. The transfer at my workplace was approved, and I began life in a new environment. My new colleagues are all kind, and it seems like I will be able to enjoy my work as before. My mother and sister, who broke into my home, will not attempt to approach my new house. They are not even in a position to do so after the major commotion during the break-in, witnessed by many. Even though my new home is far from the scene of the incident, they wouldn't have the courage to come here. As a result, I am living very peaceful days. Later, it seemed they sold the family home. Relatives refused to lend money to my mother, who continued to solicit funds elsewhere and was often a nuisance. Their financial situation appears quite dire. Relying only on my mother's pension, it is difficult for her and my sister to make ends meet. My sister continues to avoid work, and despite this, they both continue to waste money and have ultimately fallen into considerable debt. The proceeds from selling their family home were minimal, and after paying off debts, nothing was left. They moved to a cheap, run-down apartment and often argued. My mother yells at my sister to work, while my sister criticizes my mother's indulgence. No one visits them now. They've had their easy days now, it's their turn to struggle. It's none of my business. Overcoming the fear ingrained since childhood that parents are to be feared was hard and required great courage. However, even a little courage to move forward can dramatically change your life. Small acts of bravery bring significant changes. Gazing at the construction of my new home progressing smoothly, I imagine a bright future and smile contentedly.